on. I'm just kind of giving it a second, and then I will. There we go.
Yep, we're good. How about you? Actually, we're going to start now. So I want to welcome you guys to the group tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about substance use and addiction. And I want to try to dispel some myths that have perpetuated across the spectrum of substance use and addiction. That's why I titled it Hints, Lies, and Allegations, because most of what we think we know about addiction isn't really true, and the things that we don't think we know are the things that are true, and we should know those. So with that, a lot of times I get asked a lot of questions. Why is, somebody addicted to one drug and not another? What happens to people if they continue to do X or X or X? Should I be concerned that my husband, wife, cousin, my dog is having, is doing this behavior more often than not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the world, as we know it, is full of questions about addiction, just trying to understand. And because we've been fed half-truths and lies, and sometimes just outright ignorance over the years, this has become a very muddy subject. So I'm going to try to clear it up just a little bit so we can at least have a focus to understand what addiction does. Okay? So again, why does my mom, dad, son, daughter, coworker, spouse, dog like to drink, smoke pot, use heroin, take pills, gamble, or chase the mailman? So what we're talking about here isn't so much, notice that we're not really talking so much about the drug, which is what a lot of people believe addiction is about. We're talking about behavior. Why do they drink? Why do they smoke? Why do they use? Why do they do what they do? And why do they do what they do to the point that it causes so many problems? And the answer to that is a lot easier to understand and probably a little bit more simple than you think. And that is, they like the way they feel when they do blank. When they drink, when they smoke, when they work out, when they eat cheesecake, when they play the guitar, when they swim in the lake, when they swim in a pool, when they go skiing, when they don't go skiing. You name it, whatever we like to do, we like how we feel when we do that. Okay? And if you think about commercials on television, things like that, they always show an experience that people are enjoying to make you believe, hey, if you did this, you'd enjoy it. Okay? So for too long, in fact, most of the time that we've done treatment for alcohol and drugs, we've focused on the drugs. And the general population and consensus is that if people will stop using drugs, then an addiction or substance use will come to an end and things will go back to normal. Okay? But the truth of the matter is, this is just a tiny tip of the iceberg. The drugs, the alcohol, are just parts of a puzzle, but they're tiny parts of the puzzle. And so we want to see what this puzzle is made up of and what kind of foundation that we're working with here. By starting here, we can kind of understand how people move across this continuum. Okay? So if you look on here, we have all the way from non-use all the way down to dependent. And I want to stop on each of these categories so we can understand kind of what they are about. Of course, no drugs, no use, being abstinent, is a choice. And a lot of people make that choice because, well, maybe they just never got into alcohol or drugs. Or maybe they have a family history and they don't want to upset that balance. Or maybe they're in recovery and so they don't have any necessary need to use substances. It's something they can live without. Whatever the reason, we have a lot of people that don't use anything at all. But we all have to start somewhere, and so the experimental use is normally where we start. Okay? Social opportunity, externally motivated. Externally motivated means that we're having some kind of an influence coming from outside to get us to do this kind of stuff. Okay, and if you look here, first time, peer pressure, to look cool, fit in, those things are things that take place when we're unsure, and it comes from our friends, our family, co-workers, people that we know. And you know what? We don't want to look stupid, so we'll try it. We'll try anything once, twice if we like it. Which takes us into our recreation use. And this is a point where we started to do this on a more regular basis. Now, maybe not every day or every night or anything like that, but, maybe now we're up to a couple times a month, or, between 1 and 3 times a month is pretty standard for a lot of people. And look at this. choice, external influence. Okay, so what defines recreational use? We're at a party, casual use. You know, we're stopping at somebody's house and they say, "Hey, do you want a beer or something?" If not very frequent, you can refuse it. There's no withdrawal, so there's no physical dependency. You don't use by yourself. Okay, now a lot of people would say to me, "Hey, Kev, but if I drink by myself, is that necessarily bad?" No, but generally, you're going. In this case, you're going to use it with other people, and your tolerance is low. And you'll have some rules to keep you from getting in any kind of trouble, like we don't drink at home. Don't want mom and dad to see me, or we don't drink on Sunday night because we're going to go to work on Monday. However, it's easy to continue that, and then it turns into problem use, where no longer do you have special occasions where you're using that substance or engaging in that behavior. Now it's starting to happen a little bit more frequently and a lot more intensely. And now, how do you know this turns into a problem? Well, look here. Being able to use becomes important. So not only are we deciding that we want to go out to eat, but we want to decide that we want to go somewhere where alcohol is available to us. Whether we actually drink or not, we just want to make sure that it's there. So now suddenly our choices have started to change from I'll take it or leave it to now I'm trying to make sure there's some around. Okay, then we start to see relationship problems, legal problems, creating opportunities to use, loss of control. People ask me a lot of times, what does loss of control mean? Loss of control means that in a given time frame and on a continuous level, you lose control of how much you use, when you use, where you use, and what happens to you when you do use. So that by that time, if we do this often enough, we finally make it to the dependent point where we actually need it. Okay? And then we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be addicted? Okay? We have to use, sometimes because of physical symptomology that goes along with it. Heroin addicts will have to use in a short period of time because they get dope sick. In other words, they have withdrawal. Okay? You cannot not use. You have to use. And you do it because you need to feel normal. Okay? And then you start neglecting opportunities because you're going to use. So by the time that we've reached down to this area, things have gotten pretty bad. Now a continuum that we have up here means that you can move back and forth on this line instead of progression, which means you start and you just go. We found out over the years that people can actually get down to this point, and then they can move back to this point, and then they might move back to this point. And so this can kind of yo-yo up and down over a period of time. If you're yo-yoing between dependency and problem use, that's where usually somebody like me shows up. So you can tell that this starts to get away from it. Okay? So what happens here? What do we see as family members, people in the community, folks that might know somebody that has some problems? What we see is we see a cause, they're using drugs, and then we see the effect of that. And so in normal, rational problem solving is when you see this happening, you interrupt this process and things change. But think for a minute. It's not normal or rational or logical for people to use alcohol and drugs at a level which causes them problems, which causes them physical problems, which erases relationships, causes them to go to jail, to lose jobs. That's not rational or logical. It's irrational and illogical. Problem solving is a rational, logical sequence by which we identify what's causing the problem and we fix it. And so what happens is we have a clash of two different worldviews. The addict's worldview, which says, I need this drug to help me, which is irrational and illogical, and a family member or loved one or friend's view who says, you're in trouble, it's because you're using, we're going to fix it. And so what often happens is nothing. Nothing changes because we've got two different ways to solve one problem. What we need to do is get a better idea of what that problem is. Okay? So let's get a new focus on this. Let's look at this from a different perspective. Addiction, by all accounts, is defined by what you know or don't know about this. So let's take a look and see what some people are saying. According to the American Psychiatric Association, people with an addiction or a severe substance use disorder have an intense focus on using a certain substance or substances to a point that it takes over their life. They keep using the alcohol or drug even when they know it will cause problems. But if they use it because they believe that it's going to help them with their problems, you kind of see where that hitch in that thought process is starting right here? No, this is not all there is to it. There's other parts that we don't talk about. And I want to talk about them tonight because I want you to have a better idea about what we're dealing with when it comes to substance use and addiction. two words that get bandied about quite a bit, and there isn't a whole lot of ability for us as lay people to know the difference until we're explained, is that dependence and addiction. So dependence has to do with an organism's relationship with a substance and how that substance affects that organism's daily life, if you will. Okay? So what do we say? Okay? An organism functions normally in the presence of a substance. Manifests as a physical disturbance once the substance is removed. Okay? So in the case of alcohol, if we have someone who has alcohol use disorder, they may be able to function, say, drive a car, much better than other people with alcohol in their system. At the same token, when they get home, if they don't drink or if they miss a day, they may actually start to have withdrawals, i.e. the substance is removed. So what we're talking about here is a concept by which the organism has now learned to survive with this substance in its presence all the time. Addiction, on the other hand, according to Stanton Peele, and I picked this one because I believe it accurately describes what addiction is the degree to which an involvement impacts somebody's life, and yet they can't curtail or stop or impact that involvement. In other words, they have this thing that they're doing, and it impacts their life negatively, but they can't quit. They can't stop. Okay? So we have two different things here: addiction and dependency. Let's not get them confused. Let me show you that. The nature of addiction is both physical and psychological in nature, and thus both components should be treated in therapy. So we need to get something to help those cravings down, and then we need to take the root cause of the addiction. In other words, what caused all that stuff. So in other words, there has to be basically a kind of a two-pronged approach to this. The reason being is that we have 4 points here that describe addiction and what it does or doesn't do. So let's look at them first. Addictive use does not always mean that someone will have withdrawals. So if you have somebody that smokes a lot of weed, a lot of cannabis, they use a lot of cocaine, or methamphetamine, any kind of a water-soluble drug like that, the chances are absolutely great that they're not going to be able to create a dependency by which their body becomes physically dependent on it. Okay? They use it in an addictive fashion, but they don't have the dependency to go along with it. A physical dependency, on the other hand, doesn't mean that somebody's addicted. Okay? So if somebody that I know falls off the curb and hurts themselves, and they go to the hospital, and the hospital says, well, we're going to have to work on you and give you some surgery, and so they hook them up to an IV drill with a pain reliever in it. Over time, while they're at the hospital, they will create a dependency on that pain reliever, so that when they are released from the hospital, a few days later, they may find that their palms are sweaty, their stomach is tight in knots, their head feels like somebody's put a vice around it and is squeezing it tight. They don't feel good. They're having withdrawals. Okay? So you can have a dependency, but not make the choice to have that dependency because it's the way your body reacts to that drug. That doesn't mean you're addicted. Likewise, you can switch drugs, but the behavior remains exactly the same. Okay? And in fact, which leads to our fourth point, there are numerous addictions that don't involve substances at all, yet the consequences are the same. Now, in between class, my partner and I were discussing how this could be. So could somebody have a serious chemical addiction, get into recovery, and be doing the right kind of things, and be clean and sober for 3, 6, 9 months, and then they decide that they're going to go whole hog into something that we all would look at as being healthy. They're going to go and they're going to exercise more. And her question was, could that become an addiction? And you see that a lot. Because what happens is now they've made a substitute addiction, and they've substituted the destructive force of a drug, okay, or gambling or something like that, into working out. And what happens in those cases is now they start to move things around so they can work out more, or make sure that they work out, or they can work out really hard. So what they've done is they've switched involvements, but the behavior remains the same. So it's very possible for people to become addicted to things that we would look at as positive. In fact, a lot of times I ask people, are there positive addictions that can be substituted for negative ones? And everybody shakes their head yes, and the answer to that is no, because the operative word is addiction. Okay? So we have different issues, though, with different types of addiction. When we look at alcohol, illicit drugs, prescription drugs, nicotine, caffeine. These have their own set of issues that go along with it. When we look at what is more known as process addictions, gambling, sex, exercise, food, work, church, money, another person, they have yet a different set, but yet the outcome is always the same if these things are left unabated, and that is destruction. So what is it then that makes all this stuff go together? How can we understand the difference between these two and yet have some idea about what we need to do? Well, think about it. Since we started back at the beginning with why do people drink, smoke, chase dogs, chase sticks, whatever, it's because they like how they feel when you do that, then that means that your brain is the big kahuna in this whole mathematical equation. Okay? You've seen the television commercials, this is what your brain looks like on drugs. Well, your brain really is on drugs, and what happens here is it's a disease of the brain. You have a reversible brain disease. Okay? Your neurons and transmitters and everything is all jacked up because of this stuff. So when you look at the seeds of addiction, okay, the dopamine is the number one thing that we talk about in here. It's basically because when you have a positive experience, your brain starts to think about that positive experience from like, okay, hey, what was it that made that happen? Was that a substance, a behavior, a person? Was it food? Okay, well, was it at night? What was I doing? Where was I going? You know, all these questions start to get answered, and pretty soon associations are made. And pretty soon your brain knows exactly what it was that created that, and you are going to go seek that out again. That's called the drive. That drive is what motivates us to go do things. For instance, before I went back to school to become a counselor, I used to play professional golf. Okay? Played a lot of golf with a lot of people. I've played with some people that really want to learn how, and they're not very good. But what happens invariably in the middle of a round somewhere is they strike that ball perfectly for one hole. And they walk off feeling like they've just conquered the entire world, and they keep coming back. Their drive to do golf takes off, okay, just because of one hole. They may have played crappy for the first 17 holes, but they finished that last one with almost a perfect score, and they're just like, I'm coming back. And this is the same way here. Our brain is like, I got to get back there. I got to find that again. We had so much fun. It was so great. Wasn't it great? It was great. We got to do it again. And so as addiction sets in and the cycle becomes more entrenched, what we see here is that in a non-addicted brain, control is the big dog here. It runs the show. It keeps the drive down, the memory down, and the saliency, the desire for it, all down at a lower level. We don't go. For people who can drink or use normally, and I use that term loosely, okay, this control is still there, big time. But once you've become addicted to a substance or a person or a process, what happens is control gets really tiny. And the drive, though, to get that thing gets big, the memories get big, and the saliency, the desire gets really big. So we're going to go. We're going to go at all costs. We're going to go and go and go until it kills us. So what we've done is we've changed our circuitry in our brain. And now we're no longer able to decide for ourselves because our brain's already making the decision for us. We don't have a choice. So, what I like to say is, in its purest form, addiction has less to do with the substance of choice than how someone interacts with the world around them and that substance. In other words, what you do is more important than the substance you're doing it with or the engagement that you're trying to seek. So when we get into treatment, our treatment needs to be focused on three distinct things: the thoughts and feelings that go into supporting the addiction, the behaviors that are wrapped up with the addiction, and the belief systems that say, I need to do this, that whole thing about that brain. And if we do this right, what we're going to do is we're going to help people change their thought processes and learn to deal with their emotions better. We're going to give them skills. Skills are easily learned and practiced, and they become permanent to address addictive behaviors. How can I do something different? And then we're going to change those belief systems, okay, and challenge those long-held beliefs that say, I need to do this because it helps me. We're going to change all that stuff, okay? Once you've got this foundation going, addiction becomes much easier to overcome and tackle. And the whole process of learning skills, anybody can learn skills, okay? I could teach you how to play golf. Trust me, I can. Because it's a skill. If you work at it and practice it enough, you're going to be pretty good at it. Same thing with addiction, with recovery. You got to practice it. Okay? There's an old adage that says practice makes perfect. That's not true. Practice makes permanent. Remember that. Okay, so when we're looking at the continuum of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, what we have here is we get these thoughts, we get these feelings, these thoughts going. Okay? Ideally, this should have an arrow going both ways because it can go either way. And then what happens is you get this impulse. And if this is an addictive impulse, I need to use drugs or I need to gamble or whatever, then we're going to go do it. How do we interrupt that? By teaching the coping skill. The coping skill allows us to interrupt our own impulse and then do something better or do something different. And that alone right there is the key to good recovery. Okay? Okay, so Kev, what about relapse? I mean, I hear this all, people relapse all the time, don't they? No, not all the time, but it's always a possibility. Okay? But it's not what you think. Even the people that I treat believe that it is a return to drinking and drugging, and it's not. It is a return to previous ways of thinking, behaving, believing. So all that stuff that we were working on back here, you go right back to that kind of stuff here. Oops. Okay? Old automatic ways of dealing with life that have an end result of going back to addictive behaviors and thought processes and belief systems. That's what real relapse is. In fact, Karen Skorsky, the father, if you will, of relapse prevention, says that usually use happens at the end of the relapse, not at the beginning. Alan Marlatt, at in this magazine said, relapse refers to a breakdown or failure of a person's attempt to maintain change in any set of behaviors. So think about that, any set of behaviors. You want to quit smoking? Great. And you pick up the cigarette, you've relapsed, but you relapsed long before you picked up that cigarette because you were thinking about it first. Okay? It's easy. Going to go to the gym and lose weight? Great. You start slowing down and going to the gym, you start not watching your food, guess what? You've relapsed. It's failure in your attempt to maintain change. Okay? That's all that is. It's not a personal thing. It's a decision. Okay? How do you avoid relapse? Have a great relapse prevention plan. Simple. Okay? First off, know your warning signs. What kind of things would tell you that you're going into a relapse? And recognize those triggers, those things that get you thinking about it. And then get a step-by-step plan for potential relapse. What do I do if I relapse? Who do I call? Who comes in? Who does what? Here's your role. Here's your role. Here's your role. This is what needs to happen. You have that kind of plan going, this is going to be good. Have a strong support system. You know, if you have one of these, chances for relapse go down a lot. Research indicates that if without a support system, if you go to treatment and don't have a support system, you have less than a 50% chance to stay clean and sober. If you don't have a support system and no treatment, you have less than a 30% chance to ever gain sobriety. So it's pretty tough. Okay? Create healthy coping mechanisms, make life improvements, and ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. You want to learn how to play golf? Ask me. I'll help you. If I want to learn how to change a tire on a car, I'm going to ask you. You can show me. This is the key to just about anything. Ask for help. We weren't designed to have all the skills we need. We're designed to ask for help. Okay?
So what do we do if we have a loved one or somebody that we know is an addict, or we think they're an addict? And obviously we want to have a strong support system for them. How do we do that? What do we need to do as not professional? We're not professionals. How do we support them? What do we need to do?
Well, firstly, let me ask you this: Are you trying to get them into treatment, or are they already in treatment?
I would like to do into treatment.
Okay, so that's almost a whole other lecture all by itself. But let me at least say this: what the family can do is have a plan on how they want to address that person's drinking and drugging behavior. A lot of times family members will do things that they believe is helpful, which are actually more enabling or less helpful. And so it would probably be a good idea for the group of people that might be dealing with this person to figure out or to ask or to get some guidance on, okay, how do we deal with this?
So talking to a professional.
Talking to a professional or going to a recovery support meeting that's based for family members. Okay? AA has Al-Anon, NA has Nar-Anon, Smart Recovery has Friends and Family. There's a group through the hospital that is based on CRAFT, which is the community reinforcement process by which they help people. So there's a lot of ways that people can get the kind of direction and support that family members need to help that person. But I will say this: you will not, your family members or your group will not get them any treatment. They're either going to go or they're never going to go.
So we can't. You need to. You see
Nope.
intervention on TV.
No, all
That's
the
not
time.
realistic.
If they want to be honest about it, interventions only work about half the time, and that's on a good day. That's if the wind is blowing right and the sun is up. Otherwise, things aren't happening. They just, yeah. So I think that's a great question, and it's a great question that I think a lot of people need to understand is that as family members and loved ones and support, we don't have the power to make them do anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking that. All right, so what do we do now? What do we need to do at this point in time? Okay, our recovery, their recovery, anybody's recovery needs to focus on how that person thinks, how they behave, and what they can do. That's what recovery is going to be about. Treatment will come from one of these 5 levels, all the way from an educational early intervention service, which is kind of what we're doing tonight, all the way to medically managed intensive inpatient services, which are now detox from 3 to 7 days worth of that. We have all kinds of levels in between based on the severity of the addictive disorder that we're dealing with. Recovery support groups, hard to see probably on the up here on screen and definitely on video, but we have AA, Rational Recovery, Smart Recovery, of which I belong to, Life Reading Services, Moderation Management, Women for Sobriety, and Secular Organizations for Sobriety. A couple that aren't on there, of course, would be Celebrate Recovery, which is in the local area up here at the church in Greenfield, and one down on 52. And then there are other organizations that are not, they're more regionally based, that are not on this list. Each one of these has a specific way of going about offering support. Find the one that fits best with your worldview of what your life is like. Not all of these will be helpful, not all of these will feel good. You will find the one that feels the best, go to that. Okay? In SMART, our mission, as it says on the screen, is to empower people to achieve independence from addiction problems or addictive behavior with a science-based, evidence-based 4-point program. And this 4-point program is building and maintaining motivation to recover, coping with urges and cravings, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life. Okay? We know that these work. Almost every recovery support group uses some type of process that's just about like this. Okay? In the end, learning to balance short and long-term satisfactions is what keeps people staying in recovery, and learning to have a balanced life. Not spending too much time doing one thing, but giving enough time to all these things helps people find long-term satisfaction. Some of these, they may move out of their lives so they can spend more time doing some of these things. Like they may, kind of cut down on some social life so they can spend more time with the family. But if you would put a line on here and draw it around, your circle might have some chunks out of it. The goal then is to make it a little bit more round somehow. Whether you pull it in a little bit or you bring it out a little bit. Life balance is what creates that long-term contentment that comes from being clean and sober, and we hope that everybody can get that. I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. If you got some questions after this, please pop up here. You can reach me at that email address or at that phone as part of Smart Recovery if you have questions about our meeting. Also go to our website at www.smartrecovery.org. I hope you guys all have a good night. Thank you.